Howdy. Hi, Tony D with another Screenwriter's Tips. Today, the big day, the third act. The third act of a screenplay. It's everything. Okay, it's everything to the audience. It's your big finish. It's where everything happens. Now, from a screenwriting perspective, the two out of the three acts, the first and the third, are almost of equal importance because really the first act is the act that sells the screenplay. So that has to be amazing. But the third act, from an audience perspective, has to be your best act. It also has to be good on the beginning and end, because once you get people halfway through the movie, they're probably going to stay. It's hard for people to leave in the middle of a movie. They may suffer through a few not so great scenes to get to a awesome ending, especially if their friends told them, you know, oh, you got to stay for the big finish. So what happens in the third act? Well, it depends on your genre. In a mystery, the mystery is solved. You get to see what all the clever things are and how they're explained and how it all happened. In a romance, you get the end of the romance, happily ever after, or a tragic, gut-wrenching, oh no, we'll never be together. In a drama, you hit a dramatic peak, and you get the biggest dramatic moment, again, usually probably sad. In an action movie, you get the big action scene, usually the boss fight. Also in a superhero movie, also in a James Bond movie, you get the big fight at the end, and everything in the third act has to pay off. So anything you did in the first and the second act, you have to do big in the third act, bigger than the other two combined, really. So if you mention something in the first or third act, or first or second act, you have to kind of resolve it, even if it's a small thing. That's the great thing about stories. It's those little details that sometimes are like icing on the cake. You know, Indiana Jones getting his hat back in a scene, stuff like that. I just wrote a scene that was very similar to that because I always love that bit. You know, where the character gets his hat back at the end because, you know, it's his lucky hat or whatever. You know, stuff like that. It's fun, but really you want the besides all the fun stuff, besides the big fight, you want the emotional conclusion. You know, why did all this happen? Why did the character go through all this? And what has changed? And you want a little of that. You want a little of, well, I've learned my lesson, or, well, I'll never do that again, or, well, you know, we have to be on guard for evil at all times, superheroes. Something like that. Your message comes out in the ending. If it's going to be a dark message, if it's a horror movie, it's usually a very dark message, like, oh, no one's really safe. You know, that's a good horror ending. Like, yeah, the person you've been watching gets through this horrible mess, but no one's really safe, are they? Doo-doo-doo. As long as your ending is bigger, as long as your third act is bigger than your first and second act, you have a third act. And once you finish that third act, then it's time to go back and tweak the first and second act so you have that nice arc and denouement. Now the denouement comes, basically it's the end of the third act, and the denouement is the conclusion. That's when, you know, James Bond's on the raft and the bad guy's volcano is erupting and everyone's dead except Bond and the girl, and, you know, he's going to go off to a tropical location with her for his just reward. You know, in one of these space movies, it's the space pharaohs kill the alien, or join the aliens, or save the universe, and now they're off to their next adventure if it's a franchise. You know, the Marvel movies, they end with the big boss fight, and then, you know, what are we going to do now, Ant-Man? Oh, we're going to continue to be a good guy and be a superhero, not a thief anymore. Right? So that was like the message of Ant-Man, the first one. Paul Rudd's kind of a you know, thief and a deadbeat, but he eventually becomes a superhero, and he becomes a good guy to his daughter, and he's trying to reform his life, and in the end he does in the first movie, and you can see a little bit of what's going to happen in the future. And you would want that in any movie, even a movie that you're not going to franchise. You want a little hint of what's to come for this character if it's good. So if you look at a movie like The Matrix, the first Matrix, which I recommend, I don't really recommend the other two Matrixes because I felt they were really bad. But the first one, if they just stopped with that, it would have been a great ending, you know? It's a great ending with Neo. He's got all his superpowers now, and he's going to win the battle against the machines and save humanity. It's all implied. You don't actually have to see him save each individual person. And he, you know, kicks a bunch of ass and flies off into the sunset. And, you know, it's all going to be good. That's the kind of ending you want. You want to feel like, you know, leave the audience wanting a little more. You don't necessarily have to give them any more, Matrix guys. You know, you could have just quit while you were ahead. But, you know, Hollywood never does that. As long as there's money to be made. You know, don't worry about a sequel. Do not get hung up on sequels. You know, if you got a case of the sequelitis, that'll give you the temptation to pull your punch a little bit with the third act, and you don't want that. You know, I think one of the movies that suffers a little bit from sequelitis is, again, I got to talk about it because it's recent, is the Venom movie. They're so gung-ho to franchise Venom, I think. You know, they jumped right. They had this weird third act that didn't, you know, seem to jibe with the first two. The tone was a little too happy. And then they jumped right to this whole Hannibal Lecter scene with the villain from the next movie. And, like, my thought was, like, you're already on to the next movie? You barely finished the first movie. Like, slow down. You know, if the first movie's good, you're going to go see it. You know, this whole idea of teasing and teasing and teasing, you could definitely take that too far. And as a screenwriter who's trying to sell a screenplay, you should definitely not get into that. That is not a good place to go. If Hollywood buys your screenplay and you're lucky enough to get in that world in the big leagues, believe me, they'll decide to do a sequel if there's money in it. And if there is, you'll be lucky if you're even involved in it. Because, you know, you look at a movie like Lethal Weapon, you know, Shane Black wrote this amazing first movie, and then they franchised the thing, and they made like 4 or 5 sequels, right? You know, the second one was pretty good, but as it continued, you know, personally, you know, it's the first one, maybe the second one. After that, it starts to get a little tiresome. You know, as much as I like the Lethal Weapon characters, Riggs was kind of a one-shot guy, you know? Once he got revenge, his character arc was done. You know, once a character gets his revenge, his big revenge, you know, for his wife or whomever, you're going to be really hard-pressed to give him an even bigger revenge motive. I mean, you know, the only thing they could have done is kill Murtaugh at that point and have him avenge Murtaugh, and they weren't going to do that. You know, and Danny Glover was already going to retire in the first movie. So the second movie, he's like, I've got 10 minutes to retirement. We got to hurry this along. I mean, so, you know, Lethal Weapon was one of those movies they really dragged through a few sequels. Not that I don't enjoy the characters or even enjoy the movies, but it was like, come on. So again, don't get your head in a sequel. Calm down. Just make one good movie. Concentrate on making one good movie. If you're lucky and it goes well, you might even be brought on to write the second movie. Hopefully. Hollywood doesn't work that way though, because, you know, when a movie's a hit, especially if it's your first movie, the second movie becomes a much bigger project. You know? The second movie is like, oh, this is big leagues now. Yeah, sure, you were the total brain behind the first movie, but this is the second movie. People have expectations. So, you know, and you've seen people drop the ball even when Hollywood gives them the ball, even when the creator gets the ball. I mean, you look at what happened, this isn't a movie, but like True Detective. Man, that first season's just amazing, right? You watch that first season and that ending is pretty mind-blowing. Thought it was really good. And then you watch the second season, you go, what is happening? Not as good. And now they're on the third season, so hopefully the creator will, juice it up. Another thing with creatives, and this is something I'm sure some of you think of, is as creative people, we sometimes get sick of doing the same thing over and over. And that's a problem for Hollywood, because if you do, let's say you do a great movie like Lethal Weapon, and I think it was a great movie, awesome. Now you're known for being the Lethal Weapon guy, writing funny action cop buddy stuff, right? Now you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to write something a little more dramatic, or a little more action oriented, or a little more this, a little funnier. It depends on the path you want to go down. You want to write the sequel funnier than the studio wants. They're not necessarily going to go along with that, because they'll see that sequel as, hey, you already got these fans. We want the millions of fans you got the first time to be happy. And when you're talking about a business, businesses don't make creative decisions well. They make cans of peas, right? So if you make a good can of peas, you add a little salt, and you put the peas in there and a little water, and you can them up, and people like it, you want to make another can of peas to your audience. So from the Hollywood studio perspective, we don't want you to suddenly put chili peppers in your cans of peas. That might alienate some people. No, don't put more salt in it. Don't put more this or more that. Give us the same can of peas. That's the way it is. Yes, you can lay the groundwork to do a big giant franchise, but you may not get there. I mean, you may end up pulling your punches, and then you're lucky enough to make the first movie, and it doesn't do well. Better you do a great first movie and don't get to work on the sequels than do a mediocre or bad first movie and never get to make anything else. You can't go wrong with just doing it good the first time. So don't, and I cannot stress this enough, don't get caught up in sequelitis. So, in conclusion, what are we talking about for a third act? You just got to heighten everything that was in the first two acts. Take it to its logical conclusion. Give us a big show here. Remember, it's entertainment. We want to see something entertaining, okay? If you're doing a comedy, your final act needs to be funny. It needs to be funny. You need the big laughs at the end. You need to do something outrageous that nobody saw coming, right? Because comedy's surprise. If you're doing science fiction, we need that big reveal, that big science fiction-y reveal that none of us saw. I mean, a lot of it's surprise. Horror, surprise. Science fiction, yeah, that's going to be surprise. Comedy, definitely surprise. Drama, there's a lot of surprise in there. Not necessarily all of it. I mean, a lot of it will be logical. Mystery, that's probably going to be a surprise, because you probably should have had some red herrings in there. Action, definitely surprise. When a guy's moving and doing all his crazy stunts, you don't want them to be predictable. So surprise is a huge thing about it. And that's why it's so hard to write. Sometimes you just got to think of something, off the top of your head. That's why I always recommend people to take improv classes. Improv classes will help you generate those kinds of ideas quickly, and you can go burn through a bunch of ideas until you get to something that's, oh wow, nobody's ever done that before. The conclusion of your movie is going to be mostly what people take out of the theater. So remember that too. What do people take out of The Empire Strikes Back? Darth Vader, spoiler, Darth Vader is the father of Luke Skywalker. Big, huge reveal. It was a great reveal. Wasn't originally intended, I understand, but that's what made it so great. I don't know if, Lucas worked on a bunch of other Star Wars, but there was no guarantee that if Star Wars hadn't been the hit it was, that they would have ever done a sequel to Star Wars. If it had done lackluster, they never would have done a sequel. Never. It was only because it was such a hit. Yes, we need to do more of this. And with a world like that, he had a lot more flexibility, you know, in that sequel. He could go to different places. There was a lot of groundwork. In some ways, the first Star Wars movie was the first act of a trilogy. The Empire Strikes Back was the second act, and Return of the Jedi was the big payoff. So, if you look at my videos about the first, second, and third acts, you might say, hey, this is kind of short and kind of all obvious information. Yeah, because most of the work's in the first two acts. The third act is really the funnest part to write. I just finished up the third act in something, and it was a blast to write. I got to write the big fight and all the payoffs on the jokes. Then I went back and put in little tweaks to make those jokes pay off a little better. Man, when you're writing the payoffs, you already know what you're writing. I already knew what was going to happen at that point. I just had to write it and you know, have some big scenes. And then I had a denouement, which I surprised myself with. I didn't think on that too much until I got past all the fighting, and then I said, well, geez, how am I going to have this like resolution that's not boring? Fortunately, what I was working on is more of a Tales from the Crypt-y kind of genre, you know, kind of Twilight Zone-y, so it was a little bit twisty at the end. So I was able to tack on this last scene that was sort of like, haha, more to come with this craziness, and there's a little darkness in this world. So that's always fun to do. And it's the sort of denouement that it could be the end of the series. It could totally be the end of the series. And that would have been a fine ending, because I ended the main story and this sort of tacked on sort of Tales from the Crypt kind of, hey, there's going to be more craziness to come. That's also a way to end things, you know? That is an ending. I'm not really, I mean, obviously for what I was writing, it's very sequel-based. It's novellas, a series of novellas. So I'm intending to write sequels, but I didn't telegraph the next book necessarily. I mean, obviously some of the action in that novella is going to be in the next one, but, you know, it wasn't so like, you know, it wasn't like Avengers Nick Fury scene, is what I'm saying. Anywho, if you have any questions, comments, movies you'd like me to analyze, or little bits of screenplay stuff you'd like to add, you know, questions-wise, nuts and bolts things, feel free to comment in the comments. Some nuts and bolts stuff about the third act. Yes, you should put end credits. You know, especially since, first off, you'll be lucky if anybody reads your entire screenplay. You'll really be fortunate. You'll really be fortunate. Either you're an amazing writer, and, you know, I've had it happen a few times. People get to the end, and it's nice. A lot of times they just never make it that far. And you can tell by talking to them that they didn't get to the end. But if you do get to the end, that's why you need the word end credits as the last thing, so people understand it's over. After credits things. Do you really want after credits? Meh. I mean, that's usually a fun thing for the director if it's a comedy. Maybe it's a sequel. You know, I think with comedies, sure, you could add after credits or during credits, little bits. You know, I wouldn't see that for a drama. No. I can't imagine someone putting after credits for a movie like a drama. Dramas end and they peak, and you got to get out. Same thing for like a mystery. In other words, a serious piece. A serious piece generally doesn't have after credit stuff. Something that's a little more fun. Now, the Marvel movies are half serious and half funny, and they have that sort of comic booky tone to them. So yes, the after credit stuff feels appropriate. But, you know, unless it's kind of that fun thing, even a horror movie, you know, horror movies have done after credit stuff. It kind of works. You know, that to me can get a little too serious. You can kind of do that Tales from the Crypt-y stuff with it if it's fun horror. You know, if it's just borderline fun horror. You know, they tried that with Freddy Krueger. I didn't think it worked. I thought, you know, I didn't find the Freddy Krueger stuff fun horror to me because it was too bloody. And, you know, it was, to me, fun horror is like Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead to me is fun horror. Like they do after the credits stuff on that, I'm in, because it's comedy and horror. Freddy Krueger comedy is, to me, it's strained. You know, Freddy Krueger, Jason, all these movies, they're too ridiculous to take seriously. I took Shaun of the Dead more seriously than I take Freddy Krueger. Because at least Shaun of the Dead had, to me, sort of hard and fast zombie rules that I could understand. Whereas Freddy Krueger, it felt very much like they were making up the rules as they go along, and then they would break those rules whenever they needed to, you know, squeeze more money out of the Freddy Krueger franchise. But that's just my personal opinion. So thank you for watching. Check out my stuff at the Patreon, at Superfrat, at the Web Comic Factory. My name is Tony D. I'm a screenwriter, and this has been Screenwriting Tips. Good night.